Sanctuary Hall, Male Asylum Ward. This is the male patient's ward, Steve said, checking his phone's map. The women's section is on the other side. Dave pushed open a rusted door with a groan. I'm going to check out one of these patient rooms, he said, peering through his night vision camera. Inside, the air felt unnaturally thick. Jesus, this room's tiny, Dave muttered. Can't be more than 8 by 5 feet. He swept the camera around, capturing the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were chipped and stained, and the floor was covered in dust, as if the room hadn't been touched in years. A solitary bed sat against one wall, its metal frame rusted and sheets long gone. Who the hell could fit in here? Kevin whispered, stepping closer to the bed. The others lingered at the doorway, the room too small for them to fit inside. A mattress stood against a wall, sagging and stained a sickly yellow that made Dave wrinkle his nose in disgust. It's not like the private rooms, he remarked. No, it's more like a prison cell, Kevin observed, glancing at the steel door with a small peephole. They both looked around, their eyes drawn to the small barred window that let in only a sliver of light. It was almost dark now, the setting sun barely penetrated the thick clouds pressing down on the building. A cold draft seeped in from around the window, sending a chill through the room. Dave ran a hand over his face, narrowing his eyes as he surveyed the space. Let's see if we can connect with any spirits, he muttered. The silence stretched around them, broken only by the distant howling of wind outside. In the center of the room, Dave asked, "Is there anyone here who wants to communicate with us?" But there was nothing. Silence. Tanya? Dave inquired. Tanya closed her eyes, focusing. Anguish, she murmured softly. Hopelessness. Sadness. Just remnants of emotions from past occupants absorbed by the room. But no spirits. Dave glanced at her, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. He hoped for something special tonight for the channel, but up to now, it had been uneventful. Let's get out of here, Kevin said, his voice tight. I'm getting claustrophobic. There's one room that's guaranteed to have paranormal activity, Dave said eagerly, his eyes lighting up. I did some research. Room 137 has some really strange suicides and deaths. People say they've heard voices, seen shadows moving, even felt cold hands grabbing at them. We might get something good there. Steve checked the map on his phone, zooming in. Room 137 is downstairs, he confirmed, glancing at Dave. Chapter 7, Room 137. As they descended, Dave looked into the camera. He paused on a stair, his face eerie in the night vision. Since we are heading to 137, let me tell you about its dark history. It's all documented facts you can verify on Google. Must be true then, Steve said dryly. Dave continued, ignoring him. First, I'll tell you about the many bizarre suicide cases linked to this room. First case, Dr. Edward Lloyd, a brilliant psychiatrist, was found hanging from a light fixture. What makes this strange is that there was nothing to explain how he reached the fixture. He would need some form of support to get there. Without any chair, table, or other object to stand on, it would be physically impossible for a person to hang themselves from a high ceiling. How could he have hanged himself without some means of elevation? There was no explanation. Nothing suspicious, just a suicide. The case was closed. Some staff members would later admit they believed something in that room had claimed Dr. Lloyd. Something that didn't need chairs or tables to hang the poor, unfortunate doctor. Next, there was Alfred Winters, a psychiatrist who'd been at the asylum for just a year. One cold morning, he approached the window of room 137 and threw himself out. His body was found on the ground below. No explanation, just another suicide. Shortly after, Mary Andrews, a cleaner at the facility, also jumped from a window in room 137. She had no history of depression or any signs that would suggest she was struggling. Her sudden act shocked her colleagues. Then we have Jack Kennedy, Dave said, looking into the camera. He was the new manager of the asylum in 1960. He'd only been in his role for 3 months when tragedy struck. He took the position hoping to bring positive change to a facility known for its dark history. But one fateful day, overwhelmed by despair and unable to cope with the pressures around him, Jack made a devastating choice. He took a razor blade and cut his wrists inside room 137. It's strange, isn't it? So many suicides in one room. Was it merely a coincidence, or was something supernatural at play? Onto the murders. Yes, Dave nodded his head, there were also murders in room 137. Dave began gravely. Annabelle Winnett, a young nurse 4 months pregnant, was stabbed to death by William Turner, a violent patient. Coroner report stated she was repeatedly stabbed 40 times, taking both her life and that of her unborn child. Turner claimed he was possessed by an evil entity. Dave descended the stairs, his team close behind. They lobotomized him and confined him to the isolation ward for the rest of his life. Nurses reported he would sit lifeless, drooling in the corner. But occasionally, his eyes would focus, and he'd describe horrific acts, things he said he'd do if freed from his restraints. Then, just as suddenly, he'd slip back into a vegetative state. Dave shook his head, a look of genuine unease on his face. It was as if something was still inside him, something that the lobotomy couldn't touch. Something evil. The story sent a chill through the group as they stepped into the dark hallway, Steve leading the way. Room 137 is just through here, he said, heading down another dim passage. They had an unsettling feeling something unfriendly was watching them. Steve slowed to check the numbers. 133, 134, 135, 136. Here it is, he said. Room 137. The infamous Room 137, the room of death, Dave quipped darkly, focusing the camera on the faded numbers glowing faintly in the dim light. I'll tell you one more story about a murder case that happened in this very room we are about to enter. Thomas Reed, a patient committed for severe anxiety and paranoia. Known for his erratic behavior and violent outbursts, he was both feared and isolated among the other residents. On a stormy November night, the staff noticed Thomas had become increasingly agitated, claiming something was trying to kill him. In a panic, he escaped the isolation ward. Staff searched for him and finally found him covered in blood in room 137, where Dr. Winfield lay on the floor, brutally bludgeoned to death with a bronze bust of Sigmund Freud. When staff attempted to restrain him, Thomas screamed that a large black dog was in the room, though nothing was there. Frightened beyond reason, he jumped through the glass window to his death. There are other cases you can find online, but I think we better go in. Dave turned and looked at his team. Ready, he said, grasping the cold, rusted handle. It wouldn't budge. Frustration mounting, Dave shook the handle violently and slammed his shoulder into the door. The wood groaned, but held firm. This door isn't moving, he said irritably as the air around them grew colder. Let's try together, Kevin suggested. 1, 2, 3 push. They shoved hard, but the door refused to give. Damn it! Dave snapped, kicking it with force. The impact echoed down the hallway, but the door stayed shut. Steve raised an eyebrow. At 6 feet 4 inches and built like a gym enthusiast, Dave's kick should have broken it down, but somehow, it remained shut and undamaged. Easy there, we don't want to attract any unwanted attention, Kevin said, trying to lighten the mood despite the tension. He knew Dave had a reputation for losing his cool and often flying off the handle at the smallest things. It was one of the more entertaining aspects of the channel, and visitors frequently commented on it. Chapter 8, Is Anyone There? Frustrated, Dave looked at Tanya. Tanya, you picking anything up? He asked, hoping for insight into what lay beyond the locked door. Tanya closed her eyes, reaching out to the spirit world, but sensed nothing. She shook her head. Just then, the temperature dropped, making their breath visible in the chilly air. Jesus, it just got cold, Dave said, pulling his coat tighter. You know, in studied hauntings, sudden temperature drops are the first sign of ghostly activity, Dave said as he looked into the camera. Mediums and ghost hunters have theorized that spirits drain heat from the environment to manifest themselves. I think we're in for something supernatural to happen. Suddenly, a rancid odor filled the corridor. What the hell is that smell? Dave exclaimed. Kevin attempted a joke. Whoever smelt it dealt it, he said, but his humor quickly fell flat as the stench intensified. Dave's eyes watered, and he began to retch. The smell was unbearable and growing stronger. Kevin pulled his hat over his nose, his own eyes watering. The pungent stench caused Tanya to gag. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. What the hell was that? Dave asked, thoroughly puzzled. Steve, hearing the howling wind outside, proposed a theory. The wind is picking up, maybe the smell was carried in from somewhere, possibly broken sewage pipes. That could also explain why it got so cold so quickly. I think it's air escaping from a broken pipe, bringing that horrible smell with it. Dave looked at Steve incredulously. Pipes? I highly doubt sewage pipes run under this floor. Steve shrugged. They might. Tanya approached the door, her eyes were filled with fear. The others exchanged uneasy glances. I feel a really dark presence, Tanya said quietly, her voice trembling. Something's not right. The team hesitated, unsure if this was genuine or an act, but her fear seemed real. Dave quickly pulled the spirit box from his pocket and switched it on. Is there a spirit here? He asked, pointing the camera at the door of room 137. Silence. Does someone want to contact us? Can you make your presence known? Still nothing. He turned to Tanya. Are you still feeling anything? Tanya nodded, her hand resting on the door of room 137, which felt unnervingly icy to the touch. Spirit, you there? Please speak to us, Dave implored. Tanya focused her energy on the room, her expression tense. Can you make a sound? Let us know you're here, Dave asked again. The spirit box crackled, emitting a faint, electric voice through the static. The team leaned in, straining to make out the single word that emerged. Suddenly, the voice returned, clearer this time. Death. Death. That's creepy, Kevin muttered, wide-eyed as he glanced at the others. Finally, Dave said with relief, glad to have something supernatural finally happen. He turned to the camera. We've got contact. I asked who was in the room, and it said Death. Death is in the death room. Awesome. He flashed a devil horn gesture at the camera. Steve groaned and shook his head at Dave's immaturity. Meanwhile, Tanya stood silently with her hand pressed against the door. Her eyes closed as she concentrated deeply. I'm getting something, she murmured before gasping sharply. A vivid vision of falling overwhelmed her, a visceral sensation of plummeting out of a window. The intensity made her stumble and collapse to the floor. Steve and Kevin rushed to help her up as she tried to steady herself. You okay? Dave asked. It felt like I was falling. I had a strong vision of being inside the room. It felt like I was pushed out of a window. It was horrible, it felt so real, she said, her voice quavering. Dave glanced into the camera, his tone steady. Tanya's just made a psychic connection with one of the souls who jumped from the window in room 137. She's shaken up, so we're taking 5. The experience has drained her. They guided Tanya away from room 137 and out of the corridor. Are you okay, Tanya? Steve asked, concerned. Tanya adjusted her glasses and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, revealing her lingering unease. I'm okay now, she said, visibly relieved to be away from room 137. Sometimes the visions are so intense that it feels like I'm reliving those moments through their eyes. They paused to rest before continuing through the winding corridors, accompanied only by the relentless patter of rain and the mournful howl of the wind outside. Chapter 9, The Story of Charles Mayfield. Okay, Dave said, looking into his camera. Let me tell you about Charles Mayfield, who took over the asylum in 1903. Outside, darkness enveloped the building. The moonlight streaming through the window cast eerie shadows across Dave's face. It all began when staff suspected an infection spreading through the asylum. Patients started falling ill suddenly, high fevers, extreme weakness, vomiting, and in some cases, death. The doctors were baffled, they couldn't identify the cause. Then patients began to disappear. Nurses found empty beds with undisturbed sheets, as if the patients had vanished into thin air. The mounting cases left everyone anxious until something far darker was uncovered. Dave walked to a window, rain pattering against the glass as he gazed into the swaying trees below. Steve watched him, noting his knack for theatrics. One doctor eventually realized that the illnesses were caused by poisoning. An investigation revealed a troubling pattern. Patient declines coincided with Mayfield's visits. Hospital records showed discrepancies in medication administration. Several patients had received unauthorized doses. During a late-night search of Mayfield's office, investigators stumbled upon a hidden compartment filled with vials of various poisons and detailed notes on their effects. Kevin gasped. That's seriously messed up. Oh, but it gets worse, Dave said. They discovered a diary revealing that he'd been sneaking patients out of their beds at night to take them to his home. When police searched his property, they uncovered a secret room hidden in the basement. What they found made them sick to their stomachs, corpses in various states of decay, some chained to walls and others strapped into chairs. One victim lay on a table surrounded by butcher knives and surgical instruments. Shockingly, he was still alive but emaciated and missing parts of his limbs. He later died in hospital. He must have endured a slow and agonizing death. Tanya felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. I think I'm going to be sick, she murmured, clutching her stomach. Dave looked at Tanya, a look of unease settling over his features. I think it's enough to make anyone sick to their stomachs. He then turned back to the camera, his expression shifting as he pressed on. Mayfield was arrested and deemed insane during his trial. The press dubbed him the Crowley Butcher, and he was eventually committed to an asylum for life, a grim irony. Before Mayfield died, he gave an interview claiming he had been rehabilitated and was sane again. He insisted that a demon named Belphalion had taken control of his mind and was responsible for the murders. Of course, no one believed him, they thought he was mad. Tanya, well versed in demonology, muttered the name Belphalion to herself as she tried to recall its significance. Then it hit her. In the Hebrew Bible, Belphalion is known for causing psychological distress, insanity, and hallucinations. Victims often experience mental exhaustion and paranoia until they become consumed by its influence. Interesting, Dave said thoughtfully. A demon causing insanity. This would be the perfect place for it to go unnoticed. If anyone claimed demons were involved, they'd just be dismissed as crazy. It's a compelling thought. For a moment, he gazed into the distance, lost in contemplation, before continuing with the story. Sadly, Mayfield was officially responsible for 29 murders, but incomplete hospital records suggested there might have been more victims, as many patient charts were either blacked out or missing entirely. Police believed that, due to his meticulous nature, he likely kept detailed records of the victims he had tortured in addition to those he had poisoned. However, despite thorough searches of both his home and the asylum, these records were never found. Creepy, Kevin said, glancing around. This place has seen suicides, murders, and even a serial killer. It's very creepy, Kevin. No doubt about that. Let's head to the women's wing. Another horrific incident occurred there, bringing Crowley Asylum back into the spotlight and ultimately leading to its permanent closure. I'll share the details once we arrive. So, stay tuned, everyone, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Steve, lead the way.